I'm very pleased to be here. I do a lot of these kinds of visits around the world, and I like the students and the faculty to think that I'm doing it for their benefit, but I really try and do it for mine. And therefore, what I'm going to do is talk for a while and then spend the greater portion of our time trying to have some dialogue and exchange, questions and answers, and perhaps even a few debates, if that's all right. What I thought I might do in the beginning, however, is tell you a little bit about the Chamber of Commerce of the, come on in, builds up the crowd, the Chamber of Commerce of the United States, because it'll give you a better sense of what I do and how we do it. We're the largest broad-based business organization in the world. We have a budget in excess of $200 million, and all of it comes from private contributions from companies and other organizations throughout the country and around the world. Please come in. Just take your time. Go find a seat. And I spend, by the way, quite a bit of my time going around raising that money. There isn't anybody giving us the money. There's no government funds. We do two things. Okay, got it? Good. We do two things, and we do them well. First, we're advocates. We spend a great deal of time petitioning the government and the court of public opinion and the press, and everybody will listen to share our views about a strong economy and what makes it happen. And so some people would call us lobbyists. They would say we spend a lot of time lobbying, and we'll talk about lobbying later. And I say, great, lobbying is guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. The right to petition the government is fundamental to everything we believe. Here, come right over there. There's a great seat right in the front. Don't be sorry. It's fine. I'm glad you're here. The larger the crowd, the better I like it, although I won't take up a collection. So we are, first of all, we're advocates. We go out and speak on behalf of the American business community. And who do we represent? We have 300,000 direct corporate members. And through our federation, which are state and local chambers and other associations, we represent something in the area of 3 million people. So good to see you. And so it's a big operation. And as I said before you come in, we run a budget of around quite a bit north now of $200 million a year. We employ about 500 people. They're the greatest collection of people you've ever seen. There are so many. There are people that are lobbyists. There are people that are politicians. There are people that are communications people. We have things we call issue managers. They're specialists that have spent their whole life following environmental issues and capital markets issues and questions dealing with trade and issues dealing with just about any subject you can think about that affects the American business community and its relationship with government. And that's what we're going to talk about a lot today, the relationship with government. It's important to think just for another minute about for whom we do all this. And we do it for a broad base of businesses. We have the biggest businesses in the country, and obviously there aren't but a couple of thousand of those. So if you're going to have 300,000 members, you have to have a lot of small companies. And if you're going to represent 3 million companies through the whole federation, you've got to have a lot of small companies. So we think all the time about small companies. As a matter of fact, it's the secret weapon of the American economic system. 25+ million small companies run by entrepreneurs who have ideas and energy and do it all themselves, you know. Pay little attention to government. They just go about it. So that's who we represent. Now, how do we do that? And I think that's really interesting, and this gets down to the point of the interaction between business and government. The first thing you have to do, and there's an equation. If you want to write something down, you could think about it. How can you be successful? How do you set up something like this to work? First of all, we happen to have a volunteer board of directors. So you need a good board of directors, because if you don't have a good board of directors, they can, and we are very carefully picking them. So they're very strong, willing to be aggressive. Second, you have to have a decent strategy. And everybody knows in your business, and you've been here, if you don't have a strategy, all the rest of it doesn't make any difference. In a minute, I'll go over there and draw you a little picture about this. Then after you get a decent strategy, you've got to have some tactics, right? And the tactics are very much, and I'm going to apply this all to what we're doing, you've got to have these tactics, and that's how you go about each individual place that you want to convince somebody of what they ought to do. And then you have to have execution. And after you execute, the very quick thing you need right after that is you need to start correcting your execution because it didn't go well. So we like to think about this in a way that goes like this. Oop, that one won't do very well. Let's see, I'll find one, relax. I used to do this, Let's try this one. This looks good. All right, so we like to say, if you make a little diagram like this, this is the strategy part, okay? These are the tactics. This is the question of execution, and this is the question, notice I left a big box, for the corrections. Now, most people do a good job on these issues, everything from tactics through corrections. Where people don't spend enough time is on the whole question of the strategy. Really, what do they want to get done? And sometimes they get so caught up in running your tactics, doing the execution, and trying to do your correction that you forget what your strategy was in the first place. So let's take an example. Suppose we are currently, by the way, involved in a major deal in the United States arguing about a new health care bill. It's going to be so expensive, so fundamental in its change agent, and so questionable about whether it's going to work that there's brawls going on all over the United States. I mean, everybody's arguing about this. So what have we done? We tried to get a very clear strategy. What was our strategy? We don't want to louse up the program we have. We want to keep the best of what we have. That is a very important strategy. The second strategy is we knew before the recession, which changed lots of things, by the way, we knew before the recession that every company we visited, whether it's a small company or a large company, thought we needed to make constructive changes in the way our healthcare system was provided because of the massive increase in costs, because in the complex circumstance that left maybe 45 million people without healthcare coverage. They got healthcare services, but it made it much more expensive. And we were trying to figure out how to effectively use and deal with all the modern movements in medicine, all the great new cures, all the great new technologies, without bankrupting the whole system. So that was a logical, thoughtful set of strategies. Well, then we didn't keep going. We had to wait while these folks over here came up with their bill. And so what do you got? You've got a bill in the House of Representatives. You're going to have a bill in the Senate. Actually, to be precise, we had 3 bills here and 2 bills here. Then they made that into one. They're making that into one bill. They made this into one bill. And then they're going to have to take these 2 bills and they're going to have to put that together into one bill that could be signed by the president. Now, these are all tactics. How do you deal with all of this? The strategy was to remember what the 3 or 4 fundamental objectives are. And when you get into all these fights on tactics, every day you're losing sight of what your strategy was. You get one group of people, the lobbyists working over here, or the healthcare specialists working over there, or the communication people working over there, and the lawyers working over here. And they're all running around doing exactly what we expect them to do, and that's to make this thing work. And you have to every day remind them, what was the strategy? Well, what do you mean? We're doing all this tactics. And I said, well, the tactics are great, and you're doing a great job, but you're about 12 degrees off. Let's go back and ask, what was the strategy? And so we spent a lot of time on trying to, while we're working the tactics, ask ourselves, are we pursuing our strategy? All right, then we get the tactics down and we go ahead and we execute. What is the executing? Well, in this instance, it was lobbying, it was advertising, It was communications of every type. It was research studies. You know, it's the battle of the research studies. The people over here, they want to do this. They have their research studies. We over here, we want to do that. They have their research studies. And to be effective, you want to think about this in terms of what the other side's trying to do. What's their strategy? Do you really know what they want? Or are you paying all attention to their tactics and their execution? And to this point on the health care bill in the United States, which to give you a ticket on what the incremental cost could be, the government will admit now to an incremental 10-year cost of something north of $1 trillion. If you take a historical perspective in the United States, well, remember, by the way, we got 300 million people. It's a sort of big place. But if you take a historical perspective, every time the government has said what a health care bill is going to cost, it usually comes out about twice that much. So do I think it's going to be $2 trillion? It could be. Sure hope not. But so I'm always trying to figure out, and we're just using this as an example, what is their strategy? What does the government really want? Well, wait a minute. Who's the government? We got the House. We got the Senate. We got the White House. That's 435 members of the Congress, 100 members of the Senate, all the people in the White House, and every interest group from here to hell and back again that's involved in this process. And so when you ask them, when you ask yourself, what do you think their strategy is? Excuse me, I swallowed something. What do you think their strategy is? And the first thing you have to understand is they probably have 5 different strategies run by the 5 different groups of people that are all trying to advance their way of getting this thing done. Well, that makes it a lot more complicated because at the chamber we have a simple strategy, although it's hard to stay focused on it. So if we're in fact dealing with all of those other groups have a strategy, we got to understand what it is. And then the tactics are fun. I mean, you've all, it's good. You all think about this. You've all read, I'm sure, some of the interesting theses on military strategy, military tactics, and war that go all the way back into the early centuries. Well, this is a sort of the same kind of thing. You know, the government, they've got their strategy, they've got their tactics, and so we're trying to counter their tactics, support some of their tactics, support some of their strategy, and oppose others. Now, if you went around the world, you went to China, if you come to Singapore, if you go to Japan, if you go to, Brazil, go to any of the major capitals in the world, this is all done in a different way. Ours is rather unique. It's unique and it's sort of rowdy. But you know what it does? It protects our freedoms as individuals. And the right to petition the government, to disagree with the government, to sue the government, to fight with the government publicly in the press is fundamental, we believe, to our individual freedoms and our freedom as a nation. So we do it with great vigor and without fear, although we obviously call each other terrible names and we say things in the newspaper and we try and be stronger than the other side. So it is not very much different than trying to run a company selling, you pick it, semiconductors. Well, how do we make a better semiconductor? How do we get a better market share? How do we, sell our product better than the other person is selling their product? How do we have a better service arrangement? How do we have better follow-up? How do we develop new products? It's the same idea, except this is the semiconductor, which is a health care bill. And you've got to keep looking around. How do you make the best semiconductor? How do you make, come on in, there's more seats here somewhere. Either that or you can do what you do, sit on the step. That's good. And there's a seat right there, sir. Okay, good one. Otherwise, you're going to end up sitting on the step. All right. So our deal, what we do at the chamber is that we do that with 300 different issues. Now, we don't do 300 issues every year, but we follow 300 issues. There's never more than 12 of them that are hot at any time. In fact, if I could think about right now what the hottest issues are that are going on in the United States and in our Congress, they are the following. We have a major debate going on with all of these moving parts on health care. We have a major debate going on climate change and energy. We have a major debate going on the reorganization, the re-regulation, the restructuring of our capital markets, and we'd better be very careful about that. We have a major debate going on led by the unions that want much better or much more favorable government protection and advocacy for what they want to accomplish. And we have a major debate, and you can watch this now in the next 3 or 4 or 5 days here in this city on trade. And for each one of those, we have a strategy. We've developed some tactics. We work hard on execution. And we're always trying to correct what we did yesterday. And so usually a little movement this way, a little change that way, a little addition of, we have additional information, the application of another market factor, another piece of research. It is pushed all the time. So think about this. There are 5 things we're working on very hard, probably 7 others that are consuming a lot of our time, not to mention the hundreds and hundreds of things that are going on in the U.S. regulatory agencies. But just think about building a detailed apparatus like that for, let's say, 12 issues, 5 of them with a great deal of intensity. So what does that require? Well, first of all, it requires an extraordinary amount of decentralization. If everything is controlled, if I try and control everything, we're in serious trouble. So we decentralize to a whole lot of people a great deal of responsibility. We operate, by the way, with a couple of rules. Not too many rules. If you have a lot of rules, you write down a lot of rules, nothing happens. Nobody reads them. So our rules are absolute integrity. If we do that, we think it keeps us out of a lot of trouble. And a very important rule we learned from our parents. We believe in good manners. We can be strong fighters, aggressive opponents. We can be vigorous supporters. We can do all that, but we can use good manners. And after that, we have a rule. I want you to think about this. It's very hard to apply in government. But nobody is allowed to hire anybody as dumb as they are. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute. That is a strategy. Because what the implications of that are that the real core of the organization is going to be staffed with capable people. Many organizations spend a little money and a little time and try and go out and hire 3 or 4 or 10 or 500, depending on the size of the smart people, and they don't worry about the rest. You almost sort of turn it upside down, have an upside down triangle, and the most competent people have to be at the bottom that is now the top. And if you do that, then you can decentralize your operations. Then you can say and operate in a way where people are quite a bit entrepreneurial. I want to show you another picture here. We'll get rid of this one for a minute. Hey, it works. Good deal. So if you took the whole chamber, which, remember, it's more than a $200 million organization, and if you took the core of the chamber to look like that, and it's full of lobbyists and communicators and policy experts and accountants and lawyers and the people that run the building and everything else. And we have all kinds of apparatus and things going on here every day on all of those issues we talked about. But we looked at the really important issues. So let's take, just for the heck of it, 5 issues. And so the first issue we had was legal reform. We spent $40 million a year trying to reform the American legal system while protecting the fundamental protection that the legal system gives to individuals and corporations, but it's getting out of hand in the United States. We're trying to reform it. So we have a big thing on legal reform. We have a big deal going on capital markets. Right now, you all watch what's happening in the American capital markets, and they're getting better, but everybody wants to re-regulate them, and there should be some re-regulation, but let's slow it down a minute. So big time on capital markets. Another thing we're doing, and I'm just picking them at random, we have a major thing going on the whole question of intellectual property. You know, in the world today, the theft of intellectual property and counterfeiting is more than $1 trillion ripoff of American and global companies all over the world. So we have a big deal there. And I'll take one more. Let's say with the whole question of energy and climate, all right? So what we do, we go out, and in each one of these issues, we found ourselves an entrepreneur. Somebody that we thought could give a lot of leadership to this. So we hired an entrepreneur here, and we hired an entrepreneur here. And some of them we got in the outside, some of them we found in the organization. Now, let's take energy and climate. There are people working in here on energy and climate. There are specialists and lobbyists and communicators. But we said we want to have a separate organization. Somebody leading that organization, or a man or a woman. And as a matter of fact, I think that of the 5 best of them, 3 of them are run by women. We got tons of women working in the chamber. You know, they work extra hard. We really like to have them. Anyway, so we went out and hired an entrepreneur. Now, why did we hire this entrepreneur? Well, we said, look, you can have a small staff. You can have, you know, maybe you're going to have 15, and you're going to have 10, and you're going to have 8, and you're going to have 10, or whatever it is. But you have to use all this other staff, see, on a matrix basis. You have to use all the core of the organization. You can't have any more than those few people we're going to give you. But you can be the driving decision maker on these issues. Now, what do we look for in those people? Maybe I want to hire you as one of those entrepreneurs. Well, first of all, you have to be somebody that has a tremendous fear of failure. We want somebody that gets up in the morning and gets up early because yesterday wasn't such a good day, and they have to hurry up and catch up with what they didn't do. Second, you have to have somebody that's inventive and somebody that is willing to work with others, and somebody that figures out how to build teams. Because remember, we didn't give them all the assets. We're making them use somebody else's assets. And we have to have somebody who knows how to deal with conflict. Because there are other people in here that don't like what they're doing. I mean, I'll give you a great example. Now, don't you go telling any of your friends. But on the energy and climate side, one of the reasons we did that and hired up a lot of people is we're trying to shake up the people in the major organization. So what we have here is an ability that we can delegate huge amounts of authority, responsibility, money, the whole deal, and say, go do it. Now, it's gotten so complicated at the chamber. We are so global. We have so many people. And right now, today, we probably have people in 12 different countries running around doing things. We have people all over the United States. So we finally put together a room, not quite as big as this, that's just all electronics. And we keep track of everything that's going on in Washington, where all our people are. We ran 4,800 meetings in our building last year. It's like the university here. And all of this stuff is all computerized so that we can better run the business. So we know where we're spending our assets, who's there, who's, you know, and we follow everything that's going on in the Congress and in the states and all. And we're watching all this. Scares me to death, but we're watching all this, and it's also a great sales tool. See, we have to raise about almost $5 million a week to run the chamber. So we have people all over the place selling, telling people about the chamber, and we have meetings that people come to visit us, and before we let them go home, we take them down and show them our control room. And they go in there and they go, wow, it's not that good. It just looks good. It's a lot of colors, but we're building it up. We're making it better. It's because we want people to understand that the world is complex, the issues are complex, and the way we address them from a strategic point of view, from a tactical point of view, and from an execution point of view has got to be just as complex. So now when people told you to come here and listen today, they really made the point that what we were going to talk about is how to influence government, how to deal with government, what do we want from government. And I think that's interesting before we get to our discussion. if I represent the American business community, and we're out doing this thing on a pretty regular basis with a lot of enthusiasm, you might ask, what do we want from our government? And remember, we got lots of governments. We've got the federal administrative government, executive branch. We've got a congressional branch. We've got a judicial branch. By the way, we have our own law firm. We sue the federal government. Somebody remember to ask a question about this. We sue the federal government of the United States about 150 times a year on regulatory issues, and we win a lot. So, you know, we're all the time figuring out how to do this system. So what do we want from government? Okay, and I'll tell you. First of all, we want our government to have a broad global engagement, because there is no way we can trade all around the world. And remember, 95% of the people we want to sell something to don't live in the United States. Where we want to source our materials, where we want to get our natural resources, where we want to get commodities, we have got to have a global engagement. So we support our government in a broad and aggressive way while we demand from them a wholesome global engagement. The second thing we want, and it is critical to everything we believe, we want the rule of law. Now, the rule of law assumes that you have a set of rules or a set of laws under which things happen. In our country, we have sort of complicated that with a sort of a fourth leg of government that was never intended in our Constitution. It's all the regulatory agencies. But we need a rule of law, in part, so we can deal with them. The third thing, we believe the government has a fundamental role, and not doing as well as we like in part of it right now, and the education of our society. Where we really did well for the early goings in the United States was in the K through 12 and the primary grade, secondary grade education system. And then into college and universities, and of course no one would argue about the breadth and the scope and the quality of America's colleges, although they're not homogeneously all the same. You generally find MIT and Stanford might be better than some of the community colleges. But where we have failed and where government is not doing what they should do, nor is business doing enough to help make it happen, is in the K through 12 side. Half of the students in the K through 12 system in the United States do very, very well. They get a fairly decent education. The other half are being disadvantaged from day one by how they are given a primary sound education. You know, it's part of the arguments we're going through right now in the United States about trade and all the arguments about the types of jobs we should have. And what has basically happened is we are no longer running as many steel mills and places where people could work without an education. We're still the largest manufacturer in the world. We're the largest exporter in the world. But the types of work that we need people for is much more technical, much more demanding, much more analytical. And I don't believe, and we don't believe, that our government is doing well enough on K through 12 education. And we're now working with the White House on a major effort to try and upgrade that education. What else do we look for? We look to our government for rational regulation, particularly in the capital markets. The trouble is, whenever something goes wrong, then the Congress of the United States wants to fix it. Now, they don't know what the hell they're talking about, but they want, but they want to fix it. And we say, slow down. We need to re-regulate some of the capital markets, but we need to do it in a rational way so we still have massive capital markets to support a very strong economy. And that, if somebody wants to talk about that, we can do it later. We look to our government for sound rules and regulations on energy and infrastructure. And let me make a couple of comments about that. The largest landowner in the United States of America is the government of the United States. They own all the parks. They own a lot of land that is put aside for environmental purposes. They own a lot of land under which, national land, under which there is oil and gas and raw materials and so on. So we need a rational policy there. We look to our government for that. And we look to our government for infrastructure. And at one point, 20 years ago, we would ask, where's the best infrastructure in the world? And you'd have to say it was the United States. the best roads, the best bridges, the best ports. I'm coming back to the fact that you guys have done an extraordinary job in this country in a minute. The best power generation, you name it. That's not the case anymore. And as a matter of fact, we're in serious trouble. If it were not for the recession, we would have already run into the wall on power generation, electric utilities, questions of ports. The West Coast ports were all jammed up. Railroads, I'm on a major railroad company board. We were in the business of about to have to build another railroad right next to all of our transcontinental railroads. We have let slip, because of all the other demands, we have let slip the question of infrastructure, and we demand now of our country and of ourselves, because we got to pay for it, what are we going to do to fix our infrastructure? Otherwise, we cannot continue and keep up our very extraordinary lead in exports and manufacturing and trade, because if you don't have the infrastructure, nothing else works. And finally, we are really pushing very hard and asking our government for a fundamental commitment to trade and engagement around the world. I said in the beginning we wanted global engagement, but global engagement doesn't work unless you have a commercial integration of ideas, and driven by trade, driven by I'll sell you this product, I'll buy your service, I'll sell you this product, I'll buy your service, I'll buy your commodity, I'll sell you this finished product. And right now in the United States, we're going through a period of time where we're on a battle about trade. It'll resolve itself. But you might see me in all the papers here for the next couple of days sort of needling our own government a little bit about it's time to get on with a rational trade policy. So now let's see if we can tie this all up and then talk about what you want to talk about. What we do in the United States, what the Chamber of Commerce of the United States does, it is an advocate. We're advocates for the business community. And, in a way, we're a reinsurance industry. Now, we don't sell insurance, so don't get your mind around insurance. You see, if you look at the Chamber, we have 300,000 members. Of those, about 3,500 of them are state and local chambers. About 950 of them are single industry associations, like the Trucking Industry Association, the Railroad Industry Association, the Bankers Association, the Citrus Fruit Association, you name them. We got 900 of them. Can you imagine? And so we're advocates on behalf of all the business, and we're reinsurance industries for the specific associations. Let me take, for example, you're the Banking Association. We'll make it small banks. And you have a piece of legislation you want to stop, or a regulation you want to change, or something you want to advance. And you try hard. You have good people, but all of a sudden you run into a blank wall. You're not able to move forward. So you come to the Chamber, and you say, we need your help. And we look at it and say, well, this is good for all of business. After all, small banks are important to small business all over the country. This sounds like a rational thing to do. Makes all the sense in the world. So what we're going to do then is help you. We've just become the reinsurance industry. We have put lots more power behind what you want to do. All right, so we're advocates and we're reinsurers. And then finally, just occasionally, we're educators. So for example, a couple of months ago, we announced a new program to educate, to remind, to persuade, to push people to understand what created the greatest economy in the history of the world. Because I think a $14 trillion economy with all of the innovation that has come out of the United States suggests, and all the employment, that we ought to take a minute and look how that happened. What about this free enterprise thing I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, where it's based on the theory that people can succeed if they're free to do so, if they're willing to take risks, if they believe in free and open capital markets, if they believe in free trade, if they believe in the right to fail and fall down on the ground and get up and brush yourself off, which you can't do in a lot of other countries, and go and do it again. And we have this very positive program out there reminding people that's what we did, so that as we're trying to resolve all these problems we were just talking about, we can sort of look up here for a sense of reference and say, hey, that's pretty interesting. Do you think we ought to learn something from that? And why is that so important to us right now? Because if you look around the world, the United States has helped everybody think their way through this system, and now we're falling behind significantly. Falling behind on infrastructure because the emerging countries are building new infrastructure. We're falling behind on education because emerging countries are doing a better job on K through 12 education. We're falling behind on trade because other people are more vigorously investing in trade. And I think any society, or any business system at least, that doesn't always take stock of their progress and their competition and their position within that competition makes a terrible mistake. And I even think, by the way, and many of you will end up working for government, governments have to do that all the time. How are we doing in relation to how we used to do? How are we doing on how our competition is doing? Because what do you compete for? Some people think governments don't compete. You compete. You compete for human talent. You compete for capital. You compete for a competitive position in the world. You compete for national security and well-being. And so one has to measure themselves against someone else, as well as measure themselves against themselves. So what we're trying to do at the Chamber is to take our historic strength, measure it against our current position, decide where we have to work together between government and business to strengthen that position, and then set up that old triangle again. What's our strategy to get there? What are the tactics we're going to employ? How do we execute against those tactics? And how do we continually correct what we're doing as we move in that direction? Now, that all sounds great, except there's many a night that I wake up and say, have we really thought this through well enough? Do we have the right strategy? What do you think about our tactics? Are we executing? Have we set up entrepreneurs? Have we given them authority? Are we decentralized enough? Look, I'm here. There are 500 people running around the world, running all kinds of stuff for us. I can't control it. Somebody has to do it, and it has to be the people further down in the organization. And every day you got to reassess. How are you doing? You have to continually go back and ask the question, what are my strategies? Do I really know what I want to do? Do I really know where I want to go? What are the tactics I'm using to get there? How am I executing? And am I willing to publicly stand up and correct what I'm doing? Now, every system's different. And I've been to your country, I don't know, 7 or 8 times. I know most of the people that have run your country for a long time. And you've figured out how to do a lot. You have your own strategy. Is it better than our strategy? I don't know. Is it worse than our strategy? I don't know. It's not important. You've got a strategy. You've executed against that strategy. And you've become the hub of trade throughout this part of the world. Excellent strategy. I happen to know every day you have to look at it. You have to think about it. You have to think, what are your tactics? How's your execution? Where are you going? And the fundamental question is, what's going on in the rest of the world, or the rest of the town, or the rest of the states in the United States that you got to take a look at? Otherwise, you fall behind. So having said all of that, in the middle of being here for the APEC meetings and really having come with a very clear strategy, and I'll tell you what it was to really ring the bell on America falling behind on trade and to push for our own government to take responsibility for what we should do, and then to push others to help make that happen, and to do so in a very visible way while we're here. So I'm glad to come over here and take a little respite from that and remind myself that I better go home tonight and think about our strategy, think about the tactics, are they working, think about how we've decentralized what we're doing and are we driving successfully ahead, think about our execution, and think about what kind of corrections we're going to call them up tomorrow and tell them they have to hurry up and get busy on. And that's my story. And now I'll take any questions you have, and I have a system. I either know the answer or I'll make it up. So we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. I don't know if this is what was advertised, but it's what I felt like talking about, so I'm very pleased to do it. So who wants to talk first?
Can I try five? Let the leader.
Yeah, you can go first, because you're the first person I talked to, and you can go second. Lady first? Lady first. Go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, good luck on your strategy. I'll keep cheering for you within APEC.
Right.
With an organization of 300,000 members, when you're picking your strategy or you're picking whatever, are you picking a position on issues or just strategizing to get the best outcome? But with 300,000 members, is it here's what the chamber is going to do, or can you tell us what you want us to do as our members? Where does the strategy come from?
Well, first of all, that is a really, really good question. And if you want to think about it, if you just take the people sitting in this line, if we wanted to come to an agreement on where we're going to go to lunch, it'd be a battle.
Yeah.
So think about 300,000 people. But we have a system. And I'm going to tell you the two ways the system works. First, I'll tell you the official way. We have a series of committees on all of the fundamental issues, and we have representatives from large companies and small companies and service industries and heavy industries and agriculture and all that on these committees. So we have them on the environment and energy and tax, which is unbelievable, and all of that. And they come to some broad-based decisions on where we ought to be on a policy level there. And then those decisions are transmitted to our board of directors, and I'll give you more clarity on that in a minute, who just basically vote on it, and only maybe 1 in 50 we have an argument about. Now, that's sort of how the system works. And, you know, when they put that together years and years ago, they had a few issues. It was a much smaller organization. It was easy to do. So put that over here. And, by the way, it's very defendable. It really does work. But there's another part of it. I mean, I spend half of my time out at meetings, talking to people that run companies of every size, and the top dozen people at the chamber all do that all the time, which is a huge research system because we begin to figure out what the bankers need, although that differs all the time, and what the agricultural guys need, what are the coming trends, what's going on. And we try and put that in the context of thinking about what it is that, what broad-based policy has been suggested by the members, and then we have to make it work. But you can't make it work with a dumb system that just because the members said 6 months ago or 2 years ago this will be our policy, and then all of a sudden something else comes on the deal, and you don't have time to go out and run all these meetings. You'll do that next month, but you have to use judgment. And if you hire really smart people, and if you get folks that care about the members, you have to get people that really, if you walk away and don't care about the members, after a while they'll get somebody else. So you have to build a confidence in the members that you're doing a lot for them. The other thing, and if any of you have been reading some of the conflicts between the Chamber and the White House and other things in recent months, it's no big deal. That's what we do. But our members are looking for somebody to hide behind. You know, if you're a company and you decide to go have a fight with the White House, or with the members of the Congress, that could be a bad idea. But if you get 1,000 companies that have the same kind of view, then we can go do that for them. So our policy process is highly defendable, but it's very flexible. Because at 3 o'clock in the morning when they're doing a major bill, and our 3 people up there that are absolute experts call me and wake me up and say, this is the deal we can get now. Should we do it? Well, what are we going to do? You're going to call up 300,000 people and say you think this is a good idea? Yeah. So in a way, we're like a republic. We're not a democracy. We don't do surveys of what everybody thinks. We're representatives of these people, and we solicit their views all the time, and we're continually inputting and trying to get smarter on this. And by the way, when people disagree with us, when the White House disagrees with us on the, or some environmental people on the climate bill, or somebody on the labor bill, they say, oh, well, they don't represent all the businesses. No, we don't. Represent a hell of a lot of them. And you don't see a lot of them are upset with what we're doing. Somebody, you know, they were 4 people quit the chamber on very public kind of quitting, you know. And everybody said, all these guys are writing these stories in the newspaper. These 4 very important companies quit the chamber and everything. And I'm supposed to get apoplexy, you know. I only got 300,000 members. You know, we probably have $250 million a year in revenue when you put it all together. I'm not worried about those 4 people, but I'm going to treat them thoughtfully. And normally we have 4 people quit all the time because they go out of business, or they have a merger, or they get a new CEO, or they're mad or something. But it doesn't get in the paper because these quittings were arranged so that they could become a big public scene. The only thing is I didn't get excited. You know, I said, what should we do? Let's go out and sign up 400 people. You know? So the policy thing is a thing to argue about, but it's highly defendable. And it's flexible as we need it. You're up, sir.
Oh, yeah. Thanks a lot, sir. I'll save some. I'll write to you later.
Okay.
Now, firstly, with regard to internal, what, Tom, first and foremost, due regard, due respect. You're wonderful. And I think that a good tactician, a good strategist, a good lobbyist, and a good, you know, as I say that you know so much that you carry. Now, firstly, with regard to the internal, I don't have the feel-good factor, not the cool factor to convey to you. You just reiterate the fact that the changing environment is different. Now, first and foremost, with regard to the internal side. Now, you notice that with ample resignation from your chamber, and the argument, and plus the other 8, group of 8 were not quite happy with your, you know, climate change policies, carbon futures, philosophies, and whatever. You know. How do you intend to go with further from there? Because the discontentment seems to be taking advantage of the environment, of course. You know, the business climate seems to be good for that. So, firstly, with that. Secondly, with regard to the you know, as I say, 2 in 1, because Sun is involved in the question of the European Commission decisions against the Oracle-Sun merger.
Okay, let's do them one at a time.
Yep.
So let's talk about, and I'll come back to that merger deal. Let's talk about the environmental. First of all, environment, when we were cleaning the environment in the United States and around the world, when we were dealing with mercury and global acid rain and all of the easy to understand environmental questions, you know, and by the way, after the last global climate deal, we spent $2 trillion in the United States cleaning the air, the water, and the land. And the Europeans criticize this all the time because we didn't sign up for the Accord and et cetera, et cetera. Yet when it was all said and done, when the reports were all in, we had done more than they had. Now, when you get down to CO2, it is a different deal. And in a perfect world, we'd be able to discuss that. By the way, I'm not arguing the science. Wrong place for me. There are people all over that have strong views in each direction. But CO2, this room is filled with CO2. And a lot more since I've been talking. And without CO2, this world can't survive. So I would suggest, while there may be, and probably are, if you believe a lot of the arguments, CO2 issues that need to be resolved, in whether you're going to put a price on CO2, whether you're going to do a carbon tax, or you're going to do a cap and trade deal. And by the way, you've never heard me speak against those. What I have the problem with the bill out of the House of Representatives, which passed by 1 vote and isn't going anywhere, it had 4 or 5 problems with it that you would all, as a business case, if you could get away from the religion of environment, just put it outside for a minute and look at this as a business case, you'd say, well, on that bill, do you really think it's a good idea to create a global trade war by saying that any of the major countries that didn't meet our standard of what a CO2 program ought to be, then we would put a tax on all the products they sent to the United States. And most of them would come through here. I don't think that's a too good idea, because then they're going to put a tax on all of our stuff that goes somewhere else. I thought, that's not too good an idea. Now, I'm not sure that got anything to do with CO2, but it's not a good idea. Second, we basically thought that what we ought to, however we do this, we ought to do it in a way that keeps people working, particularly in the middle of a recession. And we looked at the 1,400-page bill that created, I don't know, Jim, 1,600 new organizations, new rules, new regulations, and we said, do we need all those to put a price on CO2 and do something? And I could go on and on. What the difference between us and the absolute zealots who said it's a climate bill, therefore we ought to pass it. We said we ought to have a climate bill, but we ought to see what's in it and find out what's in it helps or it doesn't help. That's pretty simple. So now then, there's a bill up in the Senate. Remember, you got to put the bills together. And that Senate bill's terrible, but some people up in the Senate wrote a great op-ed and came up with what we thought a half a dozen arguments would be for a great bill, and we said so. Well, some of the environmentalists said, well, they don't really mean it. Oh, well, we do mean it. You know, we will support a domestic climate bill. We will support a global climate agreement. But we reserve the right to see what's in it. You don't want to pass it, wake up 6 months or 6 years from now and realize you just bankrupt the company and you didn't change the environment. And, by the way, for a fact, the one thing we know about the science, if the other major industrial giants don't participate, there's no point in the United States doing anything. It's not going to change anything. So we're saying, let's get a deal that creates jobs and keeps people in work. Let's get a deal that uses new technology, some of which we would like to do. Let's get a deal that's global in nature, and we're very happy to do it. And guess what? There are always going to be people mad about this and every other issue, but there are more people supporting the questions we're asking than are not. And we're going to be all ears and very cooperative and support stuff that works, but we're not going away. We're there, we're staying there, and that's what I get paid for. Now let's go to your second question, which is the issue. It's a fascinating question. I'll broaden it just a little if I can, which is the question, what do we think about the competitiveness people, the Commission in the EU? You know, we approve a merger in the United States, or maybe others around the globe approve a merger, and then the EU says, we're not too sure we like the merger. Well, now, why would that be? Is it on a legitimate competitive basis that they want to keep in the EU a good list of competitive products so that price and quality will be continually improved? I'm all for that. Or, and I'm not attributing this to people, or is it because using your competition commission is a means of protecting domestic markets? Well, and it's not, you know, there are things that one ought to do. In the United States, if you try and come in and buy Lockheed Martin, which is one of the 3 most important defense contractors in the globe, and you're from, you name it, we're not going to let you buy it. All right? We'll sell off pieces of it and everything. We're not going to let you buy it. It would be a dumb idea. So we have to give to countries the benefit of the doubt going in until over time they may prove that their decision on not 1, not 3, but 10 or 15 deals have ulterior motives. And if they do, then you have to take a different view on that. And I would say it is clear that a lot of people are looking very skeptically at this competitiveness commission in Europe, and time will tell.
Yes, sir. With regard to debt reformation, what surprised the non-Americans or the non-Europeans? They find that the question of legality point, that you find that the first world could not agree on simple unified platform. So they're going for...
Well, I need a definition before I can get my head wrapped around what you're talking about.
Right.
When you're talking about debt reform, are you talking about deficits?
No,
are you
no.
talking about capital market reform?
No. The question is the dimension of definition that American approved the merger, but the European...
Oh, I'm with you. Okay,
Yeah.
back on that. I just didn't... of course, definition is everything. In the United States, if your company and your company wanted to merge, and you have some overlapping things, what the Justice Department might require you to do is to sell 12% of your combined company where there was monopolistic tendencies to somebody else. Okay? And that's one of the ways you measure whether people are serious in what they're trying to achieve or they're protectionist. And I have to say, you know, on that particular group of companies, or on some of the other, you know, Microsoft issues and others that were technology-based, it's really difficult to say. And so far, I've managed to stay out of those battles in Europe, but I can't promise that we will. Our strategy may demand it.
Right, okay. Coming to your mention of Lockheed Martin.
We got to let some other people ask questions in a minute. But I'll give you the yield on Lockheed Martin. Go ahead.
Okay. Now, you mentioned, relevant to education-wise, that the Americans are falling back, primarily on education. Chairman of Lockheed Martin used to be also the president and CEO. I met him too. Now, he is very concerned because the American of today is no better than their fathers and forefathers. So
You believe that?
Yes, he believed that because he noticed that the alignment of future dimension is completely different. That is why that you find here. That is why he is the director of Lockheed Martin not without reason.
No, he's a very smart guy. I think I know who you're talking about. You know, I'm not sure that's exactly what he means. I have 3 sons. We have 3 sons. They're a hell of a lot smarter than my wife and I. My wife's a genius.
Not the chosen, the cream of the crops in America.
Yeah, well, I said that. They do. Oh, I don't think we're the cream of the crop. We're just people trying to get by. I think we do have a problem. Although the middle class is much better off than it was 20 or 30 years ago. It's the people down here that are in a way disenfranchised because of the quality of the education system, and I would agree with him, and I know him well. Let's take another question. Yes, sir.
I've got 3 areas to question, and I don't mind taking it sequentially or as you please.
Good.
First is on governance. What is the Chamber's position on 2 critical issues which bugs the Anglo-Saxon world? One is the separation of the chairman and the CEO, which America has resisted very vehemently. And the second is the capping of CEO payoff, which much has been in the news. Just like your take on it from this time.
Well, first of all, you're exactly right. It's the European theory of separating the job of chairman and CEO. We've done a lot of studies in the United States, and actually the facts are that companies that had the same chairman and the same CEO in most instances have been more productive, more profitable, and better run. And you can look in Europe and pick out a number of very, very significant companies where the separation of chairman and CEO have been of huge detriment to what happened. Siemens was a great example when they got into all their problems. Airbus was going. So look, this is a matter of style and a matter of, but it's not something the government should decide. I mean, the fact that the pay czar, I'll come to the pay issue in a minute, that the pay czar is got his nose in the middle of separating. First of all, he can't do it, and we'll sue him. Only because he doesn't have the authority to do that. I mean, who set him up to do that? I mean, the government can do that if they own the company. I mean, if they're financing the company and bailing them out, they can do that. They have the right to do that. But otherwise, they can't do it. My own view is that my choices, and it's probably my culture, is that I like, and I've been on a number of very good corporate boards. I like strong boards with strong chairman CEOs and strong independent lead directors. It's a little different, but it still leaves a serious somebody in charge. Others in Europe have liked the double system, where they would have a CEO with a management board, and then they would have an oversight board. And here's one of the reasons they did that, if you think through it, because they always had union representatives on the oversight board. They wouldn't let them in the House, but they'd keep them out on the oversight board, and they would have a chairman over all of that. It is clearly a matter of style, and it is clearly something that the government should not mandate. And quite frankly, you can find companies in both circumstances that are very, very effective, somewhat effective, and not effective. And there is not a clear view there that makes better corporate governance. Better corporate governance is absolute transparency on the things that should be transparent. Okay? And of course, you know, sometimes government is an overkill. There are 17,000 public companies in the United States, most of them relatively small. And when you start having restatements out of accounting issues where you've got 13 or 15,000 companies currently restating accounting, we need a better system than that. All right, now, to the question of pay. First of all, I have a very strong view that government ought to stay out of pay. If they're going to own the company or bail out a company, and by the way, it's happening all over the world because we're in a global recession, then they can have something to say about that. Although, let me give you two examples of where that's a big problem. So the government goes into the banks in the U.S. We won't talk about it anywhere else, although, you know, we're all trying to do this in France and everything. The government goes into the banks and they said, okay, now nobody can make more than this much money, and this is how they have to pay their bonuses. We're going to cap compensation, and we have this huge company, and we've got to fix it, right? Only trouble is, these are the 18 most important people in the company. And what we have now done is capped all their compensation. Okay, what's going to happen? These companies over here are going to come over there and steal these people. And by the way, a lot of them are European banks, a lot of them are Asian banks, a lot of them are private equity guys, a lot of them are hedge funds, a lot of them are insurance companies. Because I'm sitting here, I'm running some great big Ackerman that runs Deutsche Bank, who I know very well. He even said this publicly. He said, I looked over these 25 people, and I said, if I steal 10 of them, in 2 years, we're going to get our money back 1,000 times over and then some. So he stole you, he stole you, he stole you. And why? Because the government was dictating what the pay ought to be. Then the government says in the United States, okay, now, here's the deal. No great big, you know, they're going to cut down on cash bonuses. And we're going to cut down on this and that, and you should do it all in stock or options. Well, okay. People aren't making enough money. They may go somewhere else, but they got stock and options. And now all of a sudden, because we're coming out of a recession, and those banks were really in a mess, and maybe the stock is only gone up to half of where it was, but it's gone from way down here, and these guys are sitting there saying, now that was a good deal, and the government's saying they shouldn't get that much money. Well, wait a minute. You set up the system. So when the government tries to set conditions of pay, they got to be very careful about that, because people walk. People go where they can do the best with the talents they have and the skills they have. By the way, this is not indigenous. This is not indigenous to financial institutions. You take medical centers. You take pharmaceutical researchers. You take any kind of people with high skill. And probably the worst are people that are in the whole business of computer technology and software. They don't have any loyalty to the companies they're at globally. They're loyalty to their expertise. They'll work for 15 companies before they retire. So I think you have to be very, very careful when you've got government deciding what people should make. Because government is dependent on those people making a lot of money so that the companies are successful, so that they can collect tax revenues, so that they can pay for all of the government. There's a big thing in the Wall Street Journal today. I didn't get a chance to read it all, But the city of New York is praying for big bonuses this year because they've lost about a half of their tax base. Because when they cut the bottom out of Wall Street because of a big recession, cut back the pay because you don't pay bonuses in a recession, all of a sudden the city is verging on financial crisis. And so the city's saying, if you guys could do better and make more money and get huge bonuses, and then we would tax you at a big number and we'll get some more money. I mean, you look in the United States, the top 1% of the taxpayers on the federal level pay 38% of the taxes. So let's take that top 1% and cut them out for a minute. So everybody else going to pay the other 38% of the taxes? Really, a lot of, here's the most fascinating thing to me as I look at all of these issues. It's unintended circumstances, unintended results. Let me give you an example. Dr. Guaz is responsible for some of this problem. You see, what we've done is we've extended the life expectancy of people in a huge way. Better public health, smoking cessation, all kinds of improved pharmaceuticals, much more exercise and other. So what happened? In the United States, the life expectancy has gone from, 30 years ago? When we put Social Security in, the life expectancy was like 61 and a half years. That's why we made retirement at 65, It was a brilliant strategy. So, but now, life expectancy, 78. So, 62 to 78. That's a long way. How are we going to pay for all that? So what the extension of life expectancy in the United States did, it did two things. It almost bankrupted the Social Security system, and it has bankrupted the Medicare health system. Now, did anybody intend to do that? No. It's unintended circumstance. Same thing, come back to your two questions. The way you're going to deal with corporate governance, which, by the way, there needs to be a lot of improvements, and I've been pushing for them, and the way you're going to deal with compensation, which I'm going to give you one little issue in a minute, you got to be very careful what you create, because you're going to create other institutions. You're going to drive people to other places. Good people, the best people, go where they have the best opportunities, not the best money, by the way. It's not, and how many people make that huge money? Does anybody care what Bill Gates makes? No, because he founded the company. He had a great idea. Anybody care what Warren Buffett makes? No, because he's a great. Anybody care what the great cricket players and the great baseball players? No, because there is always that high group. Well, you've got to look at what the core of people make. And my own view is there could be a lot of unintended circumstances here. And I think I'll leave that question there. If you want to pursue the next one, I'll take it.
The next one is the involvement. I'll come to it last. The second question is always puzzles me about the United States. The quality of the high school education varies between poor and abysmal. The quality of graduate education, postgraduate education is amongst the world's best. Where did this dichotomy come from? Why are the graduate schools so top-notch while the average schooling system is so mediocre?
Well, it's almost like selection, isn't it? Let's think about just the graduate system for a minute. For a minute, to see that, you have to go to the university system, to the undergraduate system. And, we've got 2,300 undergraduate universities and colleges, not including all of the community colleges and all of that. And who gets into the graduates? First, who gets into the universities? At least the top 40% of the high school classes around the country from there selected. And then who gets into the graduate schools of all a different variety, all of different levels? Well, let's say the top 20% of those schools. And then who gets into the PhD programs, the top 10% of the 20% or whatever. And where do they come from? A percentage of them come from the United States, You go into the U.S. graduate schools, you know, you think you're at the UN. People from all over the place.
And it's okay, because that's a recent origin. But if you take the quality of education in some of the best schools in the U.S., it predates the UNization of the graduate schools.
Well, I don't disagree, but I would make two observations about that. We have expanded the size and scope of it, and we have attracted people from around the globe because we are a much more open society. Some of those people were because their parents live there, and others because we're trying to get them. And we're running an H-1B visa program because we want to go all around the world and get the best talent. And then a lot of them go to school. It's a fascinating deal. And so one has to turn that upside down or backwards and say, well, why don't we see if we could beef up the high school system and get more good people into college, and then get more good people into graduate school, and more good people, you know, and so on, we'd be a much better society. Then we'll have to go get somewhere else people to come and do the work that these guys are not going to want to do because they're all got PhDs. Okay, who else? Yes. How's our time, by the way?
About the agricultural products. Yeah, because in the trade talks, the agricultural product is always an issue.
Sure.
From the underdeveloped and the developing countries try to export more of their agricultural products to, say, U.S. or Japan. But you know, I focus on the role of American Chambers of Commerce. I believe the Chamber of Commerce might play a role in lobbying the State Departments in the trade talks, trying to prevent the agricultural products being imported from the underdeveloped or developing countries. From my understanding, the American government gives out the foreign aid to developing countries or underdeveloped countries. I wonder whether there's any coordinations between the agricultural sectors in the state and the state's departments, because if you allow the agricultural product to be imported from the underdeveloped countries or developing countries, then you can give less foreign aid. At the same time, you can promote trade in the world. So I want to hear.
Well, agriculture. First of all, just disclosure. Yeah. 1 out of every 3 acres in the United States that is productive, we sell that that production around the globe. Now, I think the number is about right. The percentage of our population that are directly and gainfully engaged in the agricultural business is 1%. Thank you. That's what I thought about. And then if you go to India, you have 800 million people digging in the dirt, So, but the influence of that 1% in the United States is unbelievable. It's the old farm-based middle America. Who owns those farms? But what do we have to? Why can we sell a third of every acre we plant? Is because we don't have a lot of family farms anymore. It's highly sophisticated professional farming. I mean, we still have small dairy farms and all that, but and yet we still have the spirit of the old family farm, digging in the dirt and doing all that stuff, and they have unbelievable influence. And their lobbies are very good, too, and I have to respect them. The sugar lobby in the United States are unbelievable. I just laugh at them. I mean, they got a new argument every day of why we shouldn't let people that are going to sell us sugar at a third of the price sell us sugar. We can be just as protectionist as anyone else, particularly about agriculture. Then you go to, we're trying to do a Doha round, and you go to the Europeans. And they're worse than we are. And we're not so good. And then you go to the Japanese. Now, that's really bad. I mean, I've sat and talked to Japanese trade people, and they say, we don't talk about agriculture. I said, we want to have a trade deal. We've got to talk. No, we're not talking about agriculture. Now they're beginning to talk about it. But it is the highly emotional issue. In a way, it's like environment. It's like a religion. You're exactly right. And by the way, we could spend hours talking about how much product we buy. Let's take an example. Colombia, where we want to do a free trade agreement. We buy massive amounts of agricultural stuff from them. And we want to do a free trade agreement because we can sell them more things if we take away all the tariffs. So it does not, it's very hard to rationalize what happens in agriculture all around the globe, but it is not hard historically to understand why. We have got to come to a new view on this. I mean, you go to the Indian thing for a second. You know, India does its elections over a 5-week period of time because it's just huge population. And so Bangalore and Delhi and those guys have the election in the first, and everybody keeps the government and it's fine and we're making progress and standard of living is going up. Well, you better hope that you've done the right thing in agriculture and you're being very careful in your trade agreements because, remember, it's a democracy and those other 3 elections are going to throw you right out on your ear in the next 3 weekends. And it is a reality in India that is easily turned back to the way it used to be in Europe and the United States. And it is one of the fundamental issues about trade deals. Now, last theory about that. Why? I can't understand this, I thought, for the longest period of time. Why do we do that first in a trade deal? Why don't we do everything else first? Why don't we do manufacturing? Why don't we do services? Why? Well, because that's what you would do if you and I were buying a company from them, right? We'd try and agree, or doing a labor contract, we'd try and agree on everything we could agree on, that everybody would agree on, so we can get closer and closer and closer to a deal. And then we get down to the one ugly thing at the end, and we all got so much at risk, we'll make a deal. Well, the trade people are too smart for that, and they won't do it. They make you want to do agriculture first, because they know exactly what would happen if we did it the right way. And we took care of services, and we took care of manufacturing, and we took care of all the trade facilitation, and we took care of all that stuff. And then we said, oh, well, we got that all finished. Let's do agriculture. It'd be a different agreement, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but there's a flaw there. I mean, numbers may be slightly off. But firstly, agriculture is traditionally where most countries started. It's a very basic business.
Right, and people eat every day.
Second, and most importantly, and this happened to the Doha round very clearly, is the United States, for every $100 of earning GDP from agriculture, spends 116. The subsidy is 16%. In Europe, it's between 25 and 35%, depending upon France, Germany, whatever it is. In Asia, it is 84%, which means the governments earn from agriculture. So if you speak to the Indian ministers, they say, I'm not going to pay, let my guys suffer for the subsidy that you're paying your farmer.
Do I think you're wrong? No. And every time and by the way, we've succeeded in getting rid of a lot of subsidies. Fortunately, I haven't got a lot of farmers in the chamber. But the point is, I mean, I mentioned the sugar deal. It's ridiculous. We know it. Anyway, we'll shift around. Who else? How much time have I got, Jim? Okay, good. Who's next? Yes, sir.
What is your view on the corporate governance legislation, like the SOX bill, for instance? Right? Is it really effective?
Okay, thank you. This is the deal that they did after the Enron deal. Actually, I think some of it was useful. There were, and I'm on a bunch of corporate boards, it seriously jacked the cost for small and mid-sized public companies. And so we always are looking for ways to reduce or excuse that. On the other hand, they're probably the ones that need it the most. I think my own view is that it had a very reasonable objective, that some of it's been very helpful, and now it's time to take another look at it and figure out how to significantly reduce the cost while getting 90% of the value. And a lot of that, we could spend hours on this, gets into the accounting industry. First of all, they love it. There's another whole new great big deal. You know, that's a great, if we're running a big accounting firm, we like this business. But some of that we don't have to do every year. It would be a mistake to suggest we get rid of it, because I think you could find 35 or 40% of that has a high value. How do we get rid of the most useless 35 or 40%, the high expense stuff with little value? And hopefully over the next few years we'll do that. They just succeeded in exempting public companies who had, you know, in the bottom income. You read about that. I'm comfortable with that. Not sure the chamber is, but I'm comfortable with that because those companies are small enough that it's probably still single control, you know, one big financial officer and a couple of accountants or something, and so there's much less chance of error. The problem is that we did it so fast, and there's something to be learned right now. You know, after the Great Depression, when they put in all the SEC rules and everything, they took 3 years to do it. They took a time. They thought about it, and most of that stuff was very useful. On the other hand, now, the great preponderance of our financial regulations are closer to 1939 than they are to today, so it is time for a relook at some of this. I mean, we didn't have BlackBerrys, we didn't have computers, we didn't have computerized trading, we didn't have, you know, global markets, we didn't have all of that stuff, and so there is a time for an uptick, but I think it's better done. I mean, right now, what they're trying to do, it's one senator is trying to make a deal so he can get elected and all kinds of stuff going this. And we need to be very, very careful because we can screw up this system. And then you know what money does? Money goes where it's welcome. Money goes where it's safe. And money goes where it can be profitable. And it can leave you like that. Just like that. On a computer transfer of cash, you're gone. It's gone somewhere else. And we have to be very, very careful about that. I'm trying hard to explain that to a group of politicians that find counting past 5 a real challenge. Did I say that? There's nobody here from the press, is there? Who else do we haven't had? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I come from China, Shanghai. My question is regarding to the share by, because nowadays many like Chinese companies, state-owned or private company, they go to America, buy the share of the company. So I remember several years ago, there is a bill regarding to the oil. A state-owned company of China, they want to buy the share of the oil company in the U.S.
Of Union Oil.
And it failed with...
Didn't let them do it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering what's your attitude towards such kind of activity with the Chinese?
Well, there's a bunch of legislation in the United States called CFIUS. And it was put in years and years ago to protect critical industries, meaning primarily defense and high-tech industries. It wasn't, when it was put in, it wasn't aimed at the Chinese. They weren't buying anything in those days. Maybe it was aimed at the Russians, or maybe it was aimed at somebody else. And over all that time, it's really been a pretty good piece of legislation. Then we got ourselves into the most, I'll leave aside the China deal, but there was the port effort. People, and when you saw it on the front page of the New York Times, they ran a story 12 out of 13 days, and every one of those 12 days it was wrong. First of all, they said that Dubai ports wanted to buy, was it Port of New York or someplace? No, they didn't. Dubai ports didn't want to do anything about that. They wanted to, they were going to buy, in a bunch of ports, they were going to buy a small, about 6% of the capacity on those ports. In the company they were going to buy, they'd have about 6% of the capacity, warehousing and you know, capacity for offloading and all that. Oh, and then they said, and you know, they'd be responsible for security. No. The ports in the United States don't belong to individuals for the most part, or companies. They belong to cities and states, and the security is all provided by, you know. So 12 stories in a row. It was all wrong. All started by a couple of senators who were making a deal of some sort, you know, it was dead wrong. Everybody's all excited. So when we finally got down to the fact, they made some arrangements and they sold off some parts of the deal, and it all worked out. Why was everybody worried about that? Well, obviously, and the argument that could be made are the ports are critical to national interest and national security. And if, in fact, what the original story said, they were buying all those ports from the states and the cities, I don't think that would be a very good idea. That, you can't have another port. If you got a harbor, you got one port, you know. When you got to the Chinese companies trying to buy, it was the early time when China was beginning to try and aggregate assets. I mean, some real smart people in China sat down and said, how many people we got? How big is our economy going to grow? What kind of commodities are we going to need? And they started to go out and buy it. Well, the United States, who has far more oil and gas than anybody will focus on, because the people don't want them to dig for it, the United States said, hey, and this is some years ago, you know, we're only really growing our relationship with China. We don't think we ought to sell them our oil fields. I should think, and we've seen China has bought assets since then, and they're partnering in assets in the United States and developing capacity for refineries and all that. We have a much more open policy. But if China or England, who's our, you know, or Ireland, tried to buy Lockheed Martin, we wouldn't let Ireland buy Lockheed Martin, we wouldn't let England buy it, because it is a national resource with a great deal, as you would know, of federal capacity involved in it. So, you know, I think our relationships with China are getting pretty good. And as you pointed out in your introduction, China, most of the companies still have a major government component in it. So you could make the argument that the government of China is trying to buy this. It's a little different. But over time, we're going to do joint ventures. We're going to sell stuff back and forth. We're going to invest in each other's countries. We're going to find more common interests than not. What the real race now is, where China's way ahead, is Africa. And they got real smart on Africa. And they figured that's where all the assets are, precious metals. And precious doesn't only mean gold, but it means, you know, titanium and all this kind of stuff. And I think they're making us look silly, and we need to get busy. And my guys tell me I'm out of time, but if somebody had one other question. He put his hand up, too. All right, go ahead.
Now, given that you are strong activists and reformers on the legal front, but I have yet to come across your lobbies against the Midnight Hour Amendment Bill, which I think
the Midnight
Hour Amendment Bill.
Oh, you mean in the middle of in the Congress?
Yeah.
And when they decide in the middle of the night they've got a bill, and then, you know, everybody goes home, and then they put all the stuff in the bill they like? Yeah, that's a rich tradition in most countries. You know, we're pretty good at that, by the way. We do a hell of a deal on that. And one of the reasons we're strong is we have enough people that we can cover most of those events. We've made it a lot better. It still will get better. Listen, thank you very much, everybody. Have a nice day.